And then let's just take a deep cleansing breath together in through the nose, deep into the belly, filling it all the way up. And then slowly, slowly releasing. That's right. One more time. Deep cleansing in through the nose. Rolling the shoulders, moving around, filling that belly up. Slowly release. Well, hey there, sober ladies. Thank you so much for joining me today for the Confident Sober Women podcast. I am so excited today to share my time with my friend Mary Beth. She is the author of the new book, From Junkie to Judge: One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. She also has incorporated multiple sources to build a secular, non-12 step or faith-based recovery plan that we're going to talk about today. She's been sober since 1994, and she has used similar techniques to address her trauma and related anxiety. She's also an attorney, a speaker, and an author of the book I just mentioned. She attended Berkeley Law and worked at a law firm in Silicon Valley, then litigated class action suits, and then became a federal administrative law judge, which she resigned from in 2020. Pretty cool career. I'm super excited to talk more with Mary Beth. I'm going to turn over the mic to her to let her share a little bit more about her story, and then we're going to talk.
Well, thank you, Shelby. I'm really happy to be able to talk to your listeners today and with you, of course. I usually say that the short version of my story is childhood abuse led to childhood addiction. So I grew up in a really traumatic household. In the beginning, my mother was a little violent, mostly not connected to me, in any real way. But when I was 9, she married my stepfather, who was very abusive to all of us in the household, verbally, emotionally, physically, and sexually as well. And so I started using alcohol at age 12. Then I moved on to pot, then pills, then acid, until I found my drug of choice, which was methamphetamine, when I was 16. And I started shooting speed at 17 years old. I was in full bore addiction when I graduated from high school. I did manage to go to college. I graduated from Berkeley, but I had a really bad multi-assailant rape in college, and I moved in with a violent boyfriend. And so the middle of my senior year, I turned to my familiar relief and started doing a lot of meth again. And I spent the next 10 years in just a downhill slide on every level. I say I worked my way down the corporate ladder because I couldn't hold a job. I was emotionally and physically devastated by 32 years old, and I just couldn't move forward anymore. I was really debilitated at that point.
Wow, that is quite a story. Thank you so much for sharing so honestly about your history. I know that's not easy to do, but when we do it, it offers us the opportunity to shed light on the fact that we are recovered now and that we can get well. We can change our lives. There's a lot of hope. So can you share a little bit more about what that was like for you? Like when you decided to get sober, clean and sober, what that was like, and then maybe a few years after that, like how you did it?
Sure. So I went into a women's rehab. It was a long-term facility. I ended up actually staying for 5 months. And so in my mind, I was going into a treatment facility. But when I got there, it turned out it was actually a 12-step only program. So my first day there, they were doing step study like they always do. And it happened to be step 3, and it was, which is turn my will and my life over to the care of God of my understanding, I think is the terminology. And so I, raised my hand, good student, what about me? I'm an atheist. And they told me that it was mandatory. I had to have a higher power. I had to agree I was powerless. I had to turn over my will in my life. I had to focus on defects, none of which I really thought was a good fit for me. And so it was a problem. I mean, the experts are telling me to do something I know is impossible for me to do. And so I had to really figure out, what am I going to do in this situation? And I decided I was just going to keep my mind and my ears open and try to listen for the ideas that I thought would be useful for me and just ignore everything else. And so that's what I did. And while I was there for that long-term period, and they really did pressure me, to conform. And I did do things like I went through the big book and I went through the NA text, and I looked for ideas in all of the steps that I thought could be helpful to me. So I didn't want to reject anything out of hand. And so, for example, the powerless step, which I wasn't didn't really agree with, I turned that around and said, well, you know what? I am powerless to moderate. Like Mary Beth cannot moderate. And I went through and I did that. I looked for ideas and all of them. I really liked the 12-step one day at a time idea. I found that really useful to me, especially when I was having bad cravings, just not today, right? I'm not deciding for tomorrow, just not today. But in the end, it really, even with trying to reformulate it and use whatever I could that was valuable to me, I still had trepidation that maybe they're right and I can't recover without a higher power. And so when I got home, I actually went to the library, which I emphasize it's 1994. There is no Google. Okay. So I went looking for options. Are there actually other recovery programs besides 12 steps? And there were, even in 1994. And so I found Women for Sobriety, which is, a self-empowerment program. I found Rational Recovery, which basically is now SMART. And I found SOS, Secular Organization for Sobriety, which basically is now Life-Ring Secular Recovery. And I continue what I had done in the beginning, which was just pull out all the ideas I thought would be helpful, and I combine them into what we might today call a hybrid or a patchwork plan.
Wow, I love that. I really think it's cool how you have taken the parts that work for you and left the rest, right? I think there's a reason why, and I'm not gonna, I mean, I got sober in AA, but I also believe there's a lot of other ways to do it. And I was taught that. And I'm very thankful for that. I always say, AA is the way I got sober, but it's not the only way. But there are reasons for their method, right? They believe that, and I agree with it in a lot of ways, that we do have to become like a little bit more disciplined, like as the big book talks about, and as you and I probably both know, at least for me, I was an undisciplined person in a lot of ways. I was extremely disciplined in also a lot of ways. And so when I heard that language, I was confused because I thought, well, I can work out regularly. I can restrict my food. I can manage my emotions and my thoughts and keep myself all cool on the outside. I can show up for work every day on time, but I was like dead on the inside and I hated myself. So like there was a lot of stuff that wasn't very disciplined about myself that I needed like a little bit of brainwashing for, right? So there is a reason. And I also tell people too, in the beginning, in early sobriety, the 12 steps programs are helpful because it gives you a fellowship. If you don't want to listen to anything they say, and I tell people this sometimes, like just don't take in all of the dogma and the beliefs. You can leave that, but you need people. You need people around you that are sober people doing sober things, especially in the beginning, because it's really, really hard.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I absolutely support the 12 steps when it's a good fit for someone. And I agree, there are a lot of useful ideas there, but it's interesting because what I might find useful could be different than what someone else would find useful. And for some people, the structure of 12 steps is a really good fit, especially in the beginning. But it is important to emphasize that it's not the right fit for everyone. Some people like 12 steps early on, and then they move into other options later, or they combine, right? I mean, it's more common for people to combine approaches today than it was when I got sober. So I think it is important for us to, there's value in doing an analysis of yourself, sort of where am I? Who am I? Where do I want to go? And how do I think I can best get there? Because learning that you can guide yourself forward and make decisions for yourself is also really useful in recovery, including early recovery, to learn to trust yourself. Not that we'll make perfect decisions, whether you're in 12 steps or do it my way, you're not going to be perfect every day from the beginning. But for me to take control of my recovery and to really force myself to think about what would be useful for me, to be honest about making efforts to implement those ideas, and to be honest when I was either not meeting my own goals, not doing what I said I was going to do. All of that is important. But it was, in the long run, I think, strengthened me to have taken that control and to really have figured out what was best for me. I think it gave me a confidence and a sense of competence that for me, I might not have found, at least as early, if I would have just sort of followed along with what I was told. But that's me. That's not everyone. A lot of people really do love that structure. And if that's a good fit for them, I'm really, really thrilled that they have a place that works.
I agree, and I think what you said is really important about combining things. And I think the big book even talks about that too. Like we need outside help. I'm a huge proponent of. Obviously, I'm a therapist. I love outside help. There came a time for me, and exactly the reason why I stepped out into the online space to create my group coaching program, Sober Freedom Inner Circle, my courses, my Facebook group, to help provide some of those other resources for people or other ways of building the emotional sobriety you're referring to outside of the 12 steps. And that was extremely huge for me when I kind of got to that place where I felt like I had kind of grown out of it a little bit. I still love 12 step. I think it's amazing and I always would advocate for it, but I don't need it in the same way. I still just appreciate and respect it, but I definitely felt like I grew up and out a little bit and I needed some other things. And I think that's perfectly normal. And I would encourage people to do that because like you said, yeah, part of the way we learn how to trust ourselves is because I hear this a ton from my clients, I don't trust my decision making or I can't make good choices. And that's kind of part of the learning curve, right? When we start to really learn who we are, what we want, what we're all about, all that stuff. But it doesn't come naturally to most of us because our growth was stunted, like for you at age 12, right? Starting to use substances. That's a really young age. So learning how to do that takes a lot of effort and like the work, as we say in quotes, that emotional sobriety work. And creating healthy boundaries is a huge part of it, establishing really good routines and habits, um, finding some kind of spiritual connection or some kind of something outside of yourself that's a resource for you is also part of it. And all of these things build like that big package of our recovery program.
Yeah, and it's I mean, if I did take advantage of therapy. I really had obviously PTSD, although I didn't realize it, and I had a high level of anxiety. It took me a while in my recovery to even recognize that I had anxiety because I thought that all of my fears were valid and rational when it turns out they were very disproportionate to the risk of what I was facing, and it was a lot of obsessive thinking. But it took a while for me to see that. So I had individual therapy. I later went into a group for women with trauma histories, and that was really useful. My husband and I did couples counseling. I was on medication for anxiety for a while. I took advantage of all those other avenues because really, for me, healing from the trauma took longer than healing from my substance use disorder. I was stronger in my substance use disorder, let's say at 2.5 years, than I really was in my other mental health struggles at 2.5 years. It took longer to get that under control than it did to get my substance use disorder under control.
Well, that's because substances are only a symptom. I mean, that's what we know. As are some of the mental health disorders as well. These are all just symptoms of the bigger problem. It's like trying to fix an organ that's causing a symptom, but you're not getting to the root of the issue. If you don't get to the root of the issue, like your unresolved trauma, then you're gonna have all those other symptoms. And alcohol and substances are the same exact thing. They're just what we use to avoid the feelings, right? To numb out, to not have to be in pain. But the problem has to be solved.
Right. And the problems pre-existed my substance use, right? I mean,
Right.
when I was young, I remember having sort of OCD-like tendencies to deal with anxiety because I really there was no safety net for me. There was no connection, no sense that anyone was looking out for me or taking care of me. And there were repeated episodes that no one was. And so I remember having a lot of sort of repetitive behavior type things from when I was literally like 4 or 5 years old. And I had I had depression and anxiety when I was younger. And so that pain was older and deeper than my substance use disorder. It came first. It existed for many years before I ever picked up. And so it did take longer to heal that part. And even now, I just say I'm mostly recovered from the anxiety and the trauma, right? Mostly recovered. I still struggle at times, but it's much less frequent. It's much less intense, and it doesn't last anywhere near as long as what it used to last.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, that's what we're looking for, right? We want to reduce the frequency and the length, the duration. We want to reduce the frequency of any kind of event and the duration of the events. And if we're doing that, then job well done, right? Then we're growing and we're moving in the right direction. I mean, I don't know that any human can live in our world anyway, absent of total anxiety or absent of total fear, I mean, I know that fear is my go-to first response to a
Mhm.
lot of things too, and it's come a long way, but it
Yes.
still creeps in, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm having that feeling, or I'm feeling like a little bit afraid of, mostly it's around safety concerns for my children. Honestly, that's the biggest problem that gets me these days. And most of the other stuff I think I can handle, but that one always is a struggle, and I have to turn that over and kind of let it go. But it's still there. It's a real thing.
Right. And I actually don't think I'm going to ever get much better than this. I mean, I have 28 years of sobriety. I've been working on this for a long time. But the good thing too now is that I can recognize it. I don't believe it anymore, right? Even if I can't get rid of it immediately, I don't believe it. I know that this is an irrational response. I know that I'm exaggerating the risk that this could happen, or the events. And so that really helps to have that sort of ability to check yourself and say, okay, I may not be able to wave a magic wand and make the feeling go away, but I can at least cognitively understand that this is a disproportionate reaction.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, you said you're not going to get any better from here. And I don't know. I mean, I just feel like we're all under construction all the time, right? We don't ever truly arrive anywhere, but the trajectory is still going up, right? I mean, as we age and stage, just alone, recovery or not, age and stage gives us more wisdom, more experience. We change things, our values become more defined or different. And so all of those things lead to, yeah, like sometimes feeling a lot better about a lot of things, or just not even really getting activated about certain things. I mean, I have things today that I'm just like, whatever. I mean, it's something that used to bother me that I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm really indifferent about that now, right? And we just kind of pray that nothing new comes in. um, so tell me a little bit about how, like, as you've been sober for a long time, so you've had lots of experience with this, and I would imagine, I'm just going to guess that the family relationships were rather strained, just based on this level of abuse that you suffered, and maybe perhaps other relationships along the way in your earlier days of sobriety. So as you were sort of going through that process, and you know up until maybe now, how did you begin to restore or repair, or just kind of deal with, on your own personal level, those relationships?
I would say that the most difficult one was with my mother, who did, she was a really volatile woman, and she would, yell and scream and hit and lose control easily. But she was also manipulative, and she liked to, change history and tell stories to her advantage. And when I got sober and I started having a regular job and, more financial stability, and my mother had a gambling problem and a spending problem, and she would often, just as an example, want money from me, which was a challenge because I didn't want to pay her bills so that she had more to gamble with, right? That wasn't a good use of my funds. But at the same time, she really was at a lower income level. And so sometimes the needs were valid. And it was that trying to distinguish what's a valid use of my money to help her and what isn't was a challenge. Also, in the beginning, when she would fly off the handle at me, I was still reacting as if I were a teenager, right? I would react back. I would, say mean things, raise my voice, just to get engaged in a highly emotional and volatile way, which I soon realized I don't want to do that anymore. Like, I'm not happy with the way I'm behaving in this situation. But it took a lot of practice to really start to have a less of an emotional reaction, to really start to be able to watch. Well, first it was really watch my words, and then it was, okay, now you really got to focus on watching your tone, because even when your words are okay, your tone isn't. And it was a gradual progression to treating her in a more neutral and civil way, and a way that I could be comfortable with, that I was treating her with the sort of respect she was due as my mother, but that I wasn't engaging with her emotionally because it wasn't healthy for me. And that was going to be the nature of our relationship. It was going to have that distance, but I felt like I was doing my meeting my duties as the daughter, but not getting emotionally engaged in the chaos. And that took a long time. It took years.
Oh yeah, I would imagine so. And what I like about what you're describing is kind of that, like, loving from a distance. It's an Al-Anon, honestly, kind of concept where we can definitely kind of love and respect from afar, Right, and that requires a lot of healthy boundaries, right? So then it becomes about like, how do you not get emotionally involved in the toxicity? And I'm wondering, like, how has that worked for you? Like, what are some of the things that you've put into place specifically around that?
It's interesting because I copied my mother in a lot of ways when I was young. We do have a similar personality where we're both, had a high intelligence. We like to read. We like to sort of debate, and I really, without knowing it, absorbed a lot of her behavior. So, for example, if I was talking to a customer service representative on the phone who was aggravating me, I remember one time the woman said to me, she said, "I'm sorry, I'm doing my best." And I said, "That's what's so pathetic." And, that was just my mother's voice coming out of my body. And afterwards, I felt so bad. And of course, had no way to reach this poor woman and tell her, "I'm sorry that I treated you like this." But it really was a process of first recognizing it, that my behavior was inappropriate, and then just gradually being able to improve it. And it really was hard. It was a challenge. Even with my husband, who grew up in sort of a quiet and calm household, it took me a while to realize that for him, if I even raised my voice, that's not being mean, just getting a little louder, to him that was like screaming, because he grew up in a quiet house. He didn't grow up in
Mhm.
the type of environment I did. And so it was really also learning to watch people's reactions and understand how my behavior or my words were impacting them, to actually be able to see them and see their response in their face or their body language, and be able to adjust or apologize. All of this took a long time to really be able to develop.
Yeah, that's really good. Super insightful. If you can get to the space where you're able to recognize your own tone of voice and body language and way of interacting with others, and then watching their reactions to that, that does take an incredible amount of self-awareness, and also of humility in a way, because we can't be full of pride, right? And then be able to also then recognize like what our way might be doing to someone else.
Right. And it's also a process, I think, in the sense that it's, in the beginning, in the earlier phases, I was able to do it in more neutral situations, but the more frustrated I was, the harder it was to control. The more tired I was, the harder it was to control. So it was also that gradually sort of upping the emotional levels, that I could handle it well, right? At first I could handle lower level emotions well, but not the higher level emotions. And gradually I was able to work it further up the chain in that way. And so it really was that process on many different levels.
Yeah, you're right, and it does depend on the kind of the person or people you're interacting with, or the situation, because some of it is much more personal, right? If it's a family member like your mom, right, you have all of this history with, or maybe your siblings or other people you interact with, like first, or your children or your husband, versus like the person standing in front of you at the doctor's office who just told you they have to cancel your appointment because of whatever. That's not the same level of emotional stimulation. Now you bring to the story all of that stuff with you as you're standing. This happened to me a couple of months ago or a year ago. I was supposed to go to get a some kind of a test with one of my daughters, like something we were kind of, really wanted to get done. It was a scan of some kind. And we get there and they're like, we've had to cancel your appointment. And I'm like, you're kidding me. Like we need this appointment, right? And so, but it didn't serve anybody for me to like get upset with this woman or scream at her or do anything. So, and I stood there and I was very upset because I want my daughter to have what she needs to feel better and for us to get to the solution. But it's also not this person's fault that that happened. So, but that takes a lot of regulation and the ability to understand that, about which is that self-awareness piece. I keep mentioning that, but it's so important for us in order to live well in community with others. We have to have a level of self-awareness. And it's funny because I did some work on this last year, and I was teaching a challenge around it, and I discovered that through the research on self-awareness, like 70% of people believe that they have all of this self-awareness, but they do not. That was a pretty high number. That was a pretty high number. Yeah, and I can think of other situations too. Like I was at my oldest daughter, who happens to be 18, and she was very ill a couple months ago and was, like pretty sickly, right? And she was upset, and so I took her to the doctor, and it was, I guess, still COVID-ish times or something, and we're sitting in the doctor's office and they're like, well, you can't come back with her because she's 18 and blah, blah, blah. And the lady came to get her, and my daughter was crying in pain, and they called her back, and she said, I get up, and they're like, oh, you can't go. She's 18. And I kind of snapped at her back, and I was like, I know how old she is. But I'm her mother. And she was crying and said, can she please come back with me? And that's a horrible thing, right? It's like, that is a different level of emotion. But I did have to calm down. And then the lady, I think behind the desk, was talking about me, right? Because I know she was like, oh, but whatever kind of comment she had to say about me being snippy, which I felt bad about it, but I also felt like this is my child, like I just, it was intense for me.
Right. And that's interesting because her saying something was actually snippier than what you did. Really, you're just trying to take care of your daughter and who's asking you to go back. And so the dynamic is interesting when the other side isn't behaving well either. It's not always us, and sometimes it's on them. And so it takes a lot of skill to be able to manage all the situations. And I don't mean to make it sound like I'm perfect at it now, because I'm not. I'm just, much, much better and much more aware. But it's really, in the end, it was about, how do I want to behave? What impact do I want to have on other people? There's what's effective is one level, right? A lot of times what I was doing wasn't even effective in my own selfish best interest. I wasn't getting the outcome I wanted. But even if I could get the outcome I wanted, was I behaving in a way that I was comfortable and happy with? And when the answer to that is no, I mean, that's when, for me, I really need to try to do the work, right? I need to try to do the work.
Right. And so then that involves a lot of times looking at, well, what is happening and so for me, when I hear the terms like healthy boundaries, which I think is so important and critical work that we both are doing personally, and that I do a ton with my own clients, is, really comes down to, what do we want to allow? What do we want to allow? What do we want to allow people to, how do we want people to treat us? What do we want with our time, our finances, our emotions? What are we willing to allow? And that's when we have to really discern, like, well, actually, I don't want people to hijack my time anymore. And so I'm going to start noticing that. I'm going to become discerning about when I'm slipping into, maybe it's a people pleasing thing or a codependency thing, or, I just don't want to say no kinds of things because I feel obligated. And there's work to be done on that. But some of the initial things, if you're a beginner at this, right, can just be simply learning how to put some of those barriers up. And a lot of times it gets tricky, because when I say things like boundaries or barriers, people tend to sometimes think I mean like a wall, like a cut off. You're like, well, I can't talk to my mom because she's toxic, or I'm not, I can't be involved with this person. And sometimes, if there are relationships that you don't want to cut out in your life, you still want these people in your life, or this thing, but you want it to be boundaried. You want to have a little bit of a barrier. So it's more like a translucent wall, right? Like it's like a fence you can kind of flow in and out of, but there is something there to kind of let you be as a guide. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, so I remember people would tell me, well, you and your mother need to work, need to work this out. But the reality was, for me, it wasn't even about what she had done in my past. It was that she kept on behaving that way. And at some point I just had to say, she's not going to change. There's nothing I can do to make her change. So I have to define the relationship based on who she is right now, and not based on who she ideally would be or might be in the future, but really isn't going to be. And that was a real decision point for me, to not feel obligated to try to make the relationship more than it realistically could be, allowed me to set up that sort of more neutral boundary. I'm not going to emotionally invest anymore, because I know, I accept that it isn't going to be productive. It's not going to work. So now I can set up the neutrality and say, this is okay. This is an appropriate response. This is an appropriate way to handle her. I don't have to feel guilty for not giving in or giving more or emotionally engaging. And that was really an interesting insight. And it really helped me accept that that the relationship was going to be what it was and not change. And so I didn't have to waste my emotional energy trying to change things that were just stuck, and I can't unstick her, right? I can't make her get unstuck.
Well, we can't change anybody. And that's what
Right.
the most important thing about what you just said is we can't change anybody or anything, really. We only have control over ourselves, and sometimes barely even that, right? And so what you're doing is realizing that, like, what that process that you just described was the realization that I literally cannot change her. It's none of my business. This is how she's going to be. So my choices are accept her for who she is and let go of what I want her to be and what I think she should be and all of that stuff, accept her for who she is. And then decide what I will allow and won't allow. So that means dipping my foot into certain things and saying, "Oh, okay, I can talk to my mom. When she calls, I'll pick up the phone if it fits into my life at that moment, and I'll talk to her. But if things start to go a certain kind of way, like sometimes we get overly critical or it's very negative or something, and you might have to say, it sounds like you're getting like really negative now. Like, I'm going to go ahead and let you go." And that's like a super clear boundary. You've just said, "You know what? I met you at your level of need. I picked up the phone. It's too much for too long, so I'm going to end it." Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yes.
And I think that's a beautiful way of still being able to have certain things in our lives that we might want, like we might not want to say goodbye to certain people, but but when it's hurting you so much to re-engage, rip that band-aid off every single time, it just creates a lot of. I remember going through some of this acceptance work early on too, and it just creates so much disappointment. Like you keep thinking things are going to be different, right? And then they're not. And then so you're disappointed and then you're hurt. In this way, when you finally decide, like, "Oh no, I don't want to um get involved in her emotional turmoil or whatever it might be, so I'm just going to create this boundary." um where else have you had to do this in your life?
Uh, I guess, well, one challenge for me in recovery was definitely work. I tend to overwork. And so, for example, when I went to law school, when I had 6 years sober, and then I went to work at a big law firm. Well, big law firms pay you good money, but they really own you. I mean, I remember getting calls when I was with my nieces on the beach because they could have figured it out on their own, but it would have taken 5 minutes to figure out, and it took 1 minute to call me on vacation. And so they called me on vacation. And the truth was, that's really sort of what I signed up for when I took that job. That was part of the deal. We're going to pay you this, and you're going to be available 24/7, and you're going to work, really long hours. And so I did that job for about 4 years, and then I went to a government job, which was going, better work-life balance. One of the goals was a better work-life balance. But the reality was, when I got there, I was one of the people who worked the most hours, because so part of it really wasn't from the external, part of it was from the internal, that I really, I like the challenge, but people would ask me to do more and more work because I did good work, and they would ask me to do work that was more complex. And so I ended up doing more hours or traveling a lot, which I could have said no at some point, but I just tended not to say no. And so that was something I had to realize. Part of the issue here is me. Okay. It's not outside, it's me. And so that I had to practice getting better at setting time boundaries at work, but also, in my life and around other people. I would overbook vacation, right? I mean, I had a spreadsheet. I still have a spreadsheet for vacation, but what I was expecting us to do in a day was, really, you better get up at 6 a.m. and go to, 10 at night, or you can't do it. So it was that recognition that I was not even setting appropriate boundaries in my own choices and my own behaviors and what I was doing. And that took a while to really see.
Yeah, work is a big one for a lot of us, I think. I mean, I live with a man who's definitely like a super high achiever and hardworking and always has big jobs and stuff. And I've told him for years. I remember we've done a lot of work around this, and he struggled because he just wants to do well. You want to do all the things, and when you're in charge or you have a company that you're running, I mean, you're never really off.
Mhm.
I mean, I think we can do the best we can to create some boundaries around our work and our time, and like we can block off times, and yeah, but like sometimes you do get called. The thing about the vacation story that you just shared, though, that's interesting, and maybe this doesn't apply to your particular job, but what I think I hear a lot from other women and how we can start to combat it is it sort of goes back to that you get what you allow. I had another woman who was struggling with this, and she always picked up the phone. She always, and she would say to him, "I don't take your phone calls after 5 o'clock. I'm doing stuff with my daughter and this or that." But then she would do it, and so it's not going to change because people are going to take whatever we give them. They are just going to keep taking because they're not sitting around thinking like, "Oh, she might be on the beach right now with her family enjoying the sunshine." And they might even think that, but they're still going to be like, "Well, she'll pick up the phone, so we'll call her."
Yes, exactly right. I mean, but it was really about me because I felt like I had lost so much. I got sober at 32. I had a Berkeley degree and good grades. And my last job before recovery, I was doing word processing and I could only hold that for 9 months. I had a really choppy resume. I had basically wasted my degree. I felt very sensitive about that. And so when I got sober, and now I'm sort of climbing back up the professional ladder, there was maybe a disproportionate or not well-founded need to excel, right? To sort of make up for lost time, to really do well, to show that the person that I thought I was meant to be. But the problem was that I remember one time my therapist, when I was at the big law firm and working crazy hours, and she said, you've climbed your mountain, but what do you want that mountain to look like? Do you want it to look like this? And so it really became clear that I had been driven to have that level of success. But I wasn't really paying attention to the cost and to what I was giving up to have it. And so that really started the process of, all right, professional success is important. I like challenging work. I want challenging work, but it's not the only thing I want. I need to find a better way to balance this out.
Exactly. And I think that's the key there, is to figure out how sometimes I think the word balance and certainly the work-life balance phrase is a little bit of a scam. I don't know how much we can really, some people probably do it really well, right? And some people, most of us have to work and most of us probably have to work kind of a lot, to run our lives. And so unfortunately, the time that we have left that's not working is small, and so it's not really balanced. We're just trying to do the best we can to get the things that we want and desire. So if the desires of our heart are like, for example, if your personal core value is achievement, if that's one of your personal core values and you really value, education and success and money, there's nothing wrong with that. And if you want to pursue that and you're like in it, I am in it to win it, like I'm building this thing and everybody around me is going to come on board and you've discussed it with your people and they are supportive, then you know what? Go for it. Work 100 hours a week if that's your thing, because some people really like that. And some people have a dream and they're working towards it. But just know there are consequences. There's going to be physical consequences to you. There's probably going to be relationship consequences. And so those are the kinds of things you're going to have to sacrifice, and work out. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you're truly pursuing something like being in law school, I'm sure you remember that. I didn't go to law school, but I can imagine was really hard, like a lot of reading, a lot of work, right? And you probably didn't hang out with your friends that much or like go do super fun things because you were like focused on school. But you were doing it because you really wanted that end result.
Right. And balance doesn't, I mean, I certainly don't mean it like a 50-50, but really more in the sense of, is my time divided in the way that I want it to be divided, right? That I choose to have it be divided, whether it's, 80% work or 60% work or what I do with the other 20% I have in my off hours, and trying to box it in. But yes, it's not, even that it can be a struggle, but at least it should be a conscious. I mean, I think it's better when it's a conscious decision, when you're looking at it and you're being realistic about what does this job entail? What does it require? What part of it is actually the job requires? And what part of it am I piling on for, sometimes unnecessarily, that's not actually to my advantage. It's not even helping me be more successful professionally. It's just my nature to, keep going or try to drive towards perfection or never say no at work and take on every project that's handed to me. All those can be challenges. It's really, I think the core importance is to face what choices you are making and evaluate intermittently, are these the choices I want to be making? Or is this the place that I want to be at?
I totally agree with that. And how you do that is really making sure that your choices are aligned with your core values. So when those personal core values, when you, first of all, when you know what they are, which a lot of people do not, this is another thing that I do in that Sober Freedom Inner Circle. It's like a whole module in there around discovering your core values, those very, very most important things in your life. Then all of your decisions get aligned with that. And then you can make sure that you're spending your time, money, other resources that are according to those values. That's how we get the best balance. And what you're saying is so true. I mean, it isn't gonna, nothing is going to be 50-50 unless you're like a gazillionaire or something and you have the means to do that, right? But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is making sure that people aren't hijacking your time, money, and resources, like that you're making the decision. And a lot of times, particularly for women, I think we get caught up in the idea that we're not allowed to do that, that we aren't allowed to say, no, I don't actually want to do that, because of a variety of reasons. And some of it comes from early trauma. Some of it just comes from habit, like not being able to respect and love yourself. And that's what this work does for you. When you get to that place, you're able to finally say, you know what? I know my whole family is planning this trip and all the things, and I just don't really want to go on this trip. It doesn't interest me, or I just don't have time or the money for it. And I'm going to choose to say no. And of course, there's going to be some pushback. We don't get to do anything, good or bad, without consequences, right? There's consequences, good and bad, for all of our choices. But being able to make it anyway is when you can see the big growth. And that's when you'll be able to be like, have so much joy because you did honor and respect yourself in a way that says, I love myself enough to make the choice that was best for me. Now, occasionally we have to take one for the team, right? Like sometimes we have to go to the business dinner, or we have to go visit grandma at the nursing home. I mean, sometimes we do, but if most of the time you're making decisions that are aligned with your personal core values and that are what you want to be doing, that's when you can find that real inner peace.
Well, the other thought I have as you say that is if you did the analysis and the thought process to determine what your values are and what you want your choices to be, that will help you when you get pushback, when you try to make change, because any change that you try to make is going to be disruptive to the other people who have been watching you and expecting you to behave in a certain way. It doesn't mean that they won't adjust if you stand strong and tell them this is the way it's going to be for me from now on. But often there will be that initial pushback just because they're used to things being a way that they've gotten comfortable with. And so by doing the analysis and being clear in your own mind, about what your choices are and why, I think that can help get through that transition period when you're making the change and you're facing perhaps a little bit of pushback.
I agree. And sometimes it's really about slowing down, just really doing that self-evaluation. And maybe it's a couple times a year, or, once a year you do a big one, a couple times a year, then monthly, weekly, daily, checking in with that inventory. Like, what did I do well today? What didn't go my way? Where did I say yes when I meant no? Where did my kids need me and I made a different choice? Things like that, that's going to give you that a lot of feedback to help you inform your choices going forward, which is how we get better. It's just how we
Yes.
change. So
Yes.
cool. So this has been an awesome conversation. I'm super excited about it and glad to get to know you a little bit more. And I'm excited to read your book because it just came out. Where can people find you if they want to reach out?
So my website is junketadjudge.com, and you can reach me there or email me, marybeth@junketadjudge.com. I'm on Twitter @marybetho_. And the book, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the usual places.
Wonderful. I'll make sure I link to that in the show notes below. And again, it's been super awesome talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Shelby. Good talking to you.
How do I turn off the recording?
There should be in the